take a look at the sailing forecast, the general synopsis. A ridge from an anticyclone centered over South Biscay extends across East Spain to Algiers. Pressure is low to the west of Morocco. The wind easterly force 4 to 6, locally gale force 8 in the western straits. The weather fair, but mist patches forming tonight. Visibility good, becoming moderate. The sea state moderate, locally rough in the western straits, and the swell low, short westerly.
Tomorrow there will be patchy Levanta cloud, but long sunny periods developing, and moderate easterly winds of about 15 knots with strong gusts in the city and the harbour area. Maximum
The weather forecast is prepared here for broadcast by GBC and other programs so that interested people who are taking part in weather-sensitive operations like sailing, dredging, any of these things, even just going to the beach to sunbathe, may get an idea of what we anticipate is going to happen later that day. The forecast itself is the result of data we receive from all sources. Some data we create here and feed it to other sources that they too can use our data to obtain the forecast which you've just heard. Here we are situated presently with the RAF at North Front. In fact, it's an anniversary year this year. It's 50 years since the British Met Office has taken control of the office here in Gibraltar. Several locations before we ended up here with the RAF. We started off, I believe, at Windmill Hill in 1935, although weather readings of various sorts have been made here on Gibraltar for something like 200 years. I have here a report that's just been written, and it suggested that one of the earliest events to concentrate the minds of Gibraltar people occurred on the 31st of January 1776, when 50 people were killed in a great deluge of unrecorded intensity. And then later, during the siege of Gibraltar in 1779, there were various comments on the weather that occurred at that time. So they've been interested in weather in Gibraltar for a very long time. The Met Office has several sections. The one that I'm presently working with is closely associated with the RAF alone. And this is why we are here situated with the RAF, supplying forecasts for the support aircraft with the RAF, but also for all the civil aircraft that come in. This is a joint user airfield, and we supply forecasts to all, even though primarily we are here to support the Royal Air Force. Here in Gibraltar, the wind is of particular importance because the turbulence associated with wind striking the rock and flowing over the rock as the aircraft is taking off, and indeed also on landing. So he's interested in takeoff conditions. He's interested in weather en route, whether his aircraft will be flying through significant weather. He's interested in the wind speed and direction at the flight levels that he's going at. And then, more particularly, he's interested in the weather at his terminal aerodrome, so that when he gets there, he needs to have an idea of what the wind, weather, visibility is likely to be. And he always has to be sure that if he's unable for whatever reason to land at his terminal aerodrome, he can divert to a diversion airfield. So we always include as part of our briefing weather at several airfields other than the one he's going to for this particular reason. I think it's fair to say that meteorology is the one clear example of continued, immediate, and regular international exchange of data. The various methods of exchange of data are by means of codes that language is removed. You don't need to speak Russian to understand Russian weather observations and so on. But we have an internationally agreed series of codes that our observations and observations in other places can be exchanged, and this is done freely, without cost, and without any delay. Clearly, we cannot have delay with the exchange of weather information. And this explains why in times of war, during the last war, when we were not getting this exchange of information from the continent that was controlled by the Germans, we then used Pathfinder aircraft and meteorological reconnaissance flights over areas for which we have little data. As meteorologists, we are interested in a complex series of comments on the weather. First of all, is it raining? Is it cloudy? Is the cloud increasing? There are in fact 99 different variations of what is happening to the weather as such at a particular time. In addition to this, we need to know the pressure, how the pressure has changed in the last 3 hours, by how much it has changed, the temperature, the dew point of the air, to get an idea of how humid it is. This is particularly important here in Gibraltar in an easterly, when we get temperatures which are not as high as those experienced during the westerly, but it feels much, much warmer because the evaporation of air from our skin is conditioned by the humidity of the air. We need to know the cloud in the sky. There are 3 main types of cloud. Each of these 3 main types has 9 subdivisions. We need to know how much of each particular type of cloud, the height of each particular type of cloud, and all this is fed into a series of 5-figure groups which determines precisely the weather at a particular time here at Gibraltar. And we know that at that same time, observers at all other bases, normally associated with airfields, but not always, are taking an identical type of weather observation, describing their weather in precisely the same terms, so that when we exchange them, we can convert these observations into a series of diagrammatic representations of the weather around the location on a large map, and we produce thereby a synoptic chart which shows the weather at the same instant in time over a large area of the globe. And this then, when it is converted from the figures into the little pictorial symbols on the map, is presented to the forecaster for analysis. Bracknell is one of 2 world centers, Washington is the other, that produces forecasts for the whole globe and exchanges them with other nations. The method by which this is done, we have a high-powered computer. In fact, when it was installed in 1982, it was the most powerful computer in the world, Cyber 205. The data, the observation data that I spoke about earlier, is fed into this computer, and it is able, by its complex nature, to produce forecast steps of weather at exactly the same locations for 12-minute steps. And by these 12-minute steps, we eventually build up, by the computer, a forecast of the situation in 12 hours, 24, 48 hours time. This is done for surface considerations and also at various levels in the upper atmosphere. Here in Gibraltar, we have an antenna connected to a receiving equipment. We call it APT, Automatic Picture Transference, from satellites. There are 2 types of satellites, taking photographs and sending them back to Earth. There's the polar orbiting satellite, which flies at around about 800 miles and makes 2 passes over the same part of the globe a day, one going north, one coming south. Then additionally, there are the geostationary satellites. These are about 25,000 miles above the equator, and they move around in association with the Earth, so they always appear to be in the same position relative to the Earth. And this satellite takes photographs every half an hour. These are digitalized, sent to a receiving station in Germany on the ground, and this is then processed, sent back to the satellite, and receiving stations on Earth can pick up these photographs direct from the satellite. Regrettably, we don't have such apparatus here at Gibraltar, but it's well on the cards. We will be having it within a year or so. We have a radio sonde office. balloons from this station are released 4 times a day, regularly. 2 are just for wind finding. 2 others, the main ones, midnight and 12 o'clock GMT each day, are released to find wind, certainly, but also temperature, pressure, and humidity as the balloon carries the transmitting apparatus aloft. This information is of particular importance here to the forecaster, but it is also an essential part of the international network of such stations, where again, at the same time, these upper air observing stations or radiosonde stations all make an observation at the same time, and this information is sent back to the main centers, Bracknell and Washington and so on, where their information is fed into the computer to help us make the forecasts I referred to earlier. First of all, the balloon is filled with hydrogen, and you will see the very stringent fire safety precautions that are carried out by the duty personnel. The balloon is filled with enough hydrogen so that it will carry its load into the upper air at around about 1,000 feet a minute. The attachments which you will see placed on the balloon include a parachute, so that when the balloon bursts, as it will eventually, the apparatus is allowed to come back to the earth fairly gently, just in case it should impinge on somebody or something. It also has a large radar reflector, which enables the balloon itself to be followed by radar, and this enables us to determine the wind direction and speed that's driving the balloon along. Then, at about 100-foot length beneath the balloon, we have this radiosonde equipment, which has a capsule inside which measures pressure, an aneroid capsule. It has a bimetallic strip that measures temperature, and a hair which responds to variations in humidity, it gets longer, it gets shorter. And the apparatus permits each of these elements to be sent out as a coded radio signal, which is received on Earth by the receiving station here at Gibraltar, converted into values that are more meaningful to the forecaster, and then converting these radio signals into data which the forecaster and the computer can use to produce its forecasts. Having filled it and made all the attachments to it, we here in Gibraltar, as you well know, have to contend with normally east or west blowing winds. Having determined which it is, the balloon and the apparatus attached to it are released so that the wind will carry it away from all the buildings. Once the balloon has gone away, if the winds are particularly strong, we employ a slow ratchet release mechanism so that the sonde is slowly deployed to its full distance beneath the balloon. And when this has been done, the observer goes to the visual apparatus, locates on the balloon as quickly as he can. This controls the radar set, and inside there is a man sat watching the radar. When he is satisfied that the radar has locked onto the balloon, he discontinues or switches off the visual from outside, and the radar follows it then automatically. As well as tracking the balloon, which gives us the wind at the various levels, we receive the radio signals, and these we select from these particular points in the atmosphere where temperature or pressure is changing markedly. But also we want to know these values at standard pressure levels in the atmosphere as the balloon goes up. The surface pressure on the face of the Earth is around about 1,000 millibars, and we use that as our base, and then we are interested in certain fixed pressure levels through the atmosphere, 850 millibars, 700 and so on, until the balloon normally bursts between 50 and 10 millibars, related to 1,000 millibars that is on the surface. We have a team of two, the area technical officer and his colleague, who service and maintain all the equipment that we use here in Gibraltar, both at the radio sound office with the radar and radio receiving equipment, with the equipment we use in the main Met office, the mufax receivers, the teleprinters, the radio receivers that we use to obtain some of our equipment, some of our pictures from Bracknell, so that without them, with their regular servicing, our work would very quickly come to a halt. Cathode ray direction finding. Gibraltar is one of a network of 5 stations, there are 4 in UK and Gibraltar, who regularly, each hour during daylight hours, locate by direction bearing thunderstorms that occur over much of Europe and the eastern Atlantic. We need to have a long baseline between the stations to give us a separation that's necessary so that we can locate precisely where these thunderstorms are. One of the 5 stations is a controlling station, and this station determines automatically which particular thunderstorm, which particular flash they're going to locate on, and that signal is transmitted between stations, and they all take a bearing on that particular flash. These bearings are then plotted, and the position of the thunderstorm is made and subsequently passed down the line to the various forecast offices who plot them, and again it's added information to the forecast in its preparation of forecasts. We have a particular problem here in Gibraltar, even though we have very nice summers and so on. The wind is capricious. The large land masses we have to the north and south of the Straits of Gibraltar, the narrow Strait of Gibraltar itself determines the wind that passes through the strait, which is normally east or west, as we well know, to determine in advance which wind is going to blow. We attempt to give as much advance notice of the change of type that is possible, but this is sometimes, if the change of type is going to be a light easterly or a light westerly, it's sometimes difficult to be precise in the timing. But we get a good proportion of them accurately, and this is of course particularly important to the runway use, to the yachts that sail around, and indeed the people in Gibraltar, some of whom don't like the easterly levanter, would you believe. The state of the sea is directly related to the strength of the wind that's blowing across it. This is compounded in the Gibraltar area by the meeting of the 2 tides, the Atlantic and the Mediterranean waters, and the exchange of water between the 2. We have a photograph recently received, taken from the American Space Shuttle last October, which shows a photograph of the Strait area with what appears to be cloud over the Alboran Sea, which in fact is not cloud, but various surface roughnesses on the surface of the sea, and also the various flows that are visible from that height that are taking place just beneath the surface of the sea. And even though we are a rather small part of a vast organization, it's a necessary small part, and that enables us to bring you the forecast that you are particularly interested here in Gibraltar.
Gibraltar weather.
And we take a look at the sailing forecast, the general synopsis. A ridge from an anticyclone centred over South Biscay extends across East Spain to Algiers. Pressure is low to the west of Morocco. The wind easterly force 4 to 6, locally gale force 8 in the western straits. The weather fair, but mist patches forming tonight. Visibility good, becoming moderate. The sea state moderate, locally rough in the western straits, and the swell low, short westerly.
Gibraltar weather.
The installation of
1,000 entries were received by the company for their competition to suggest a name. 40 people opted for Gibraltaric, and the company's directors and staff took the final decision. A draw took place at the Rock Hotel today among the 40 winners, and Mrs. Gladys Gaduso won a trip to London for 2. The other runners-up were given a GB Airways bag and pen as compensation. The draw was conducted in the presence of Mr. Robert Vasquez, Commissioner of Oaths, and GB Airways Managing Director, Mr. James Gallero, thanked everyone for helping to choose the name of the aircraft.
The Moroccan Association held a reception yesterday evening to mark the anniversary of the